Thank you. And I want to thank the organizers and especially Jakub for having invited me in this workshop. It is really super interesting and I'm learning lots of things. So thanks a lot. Since it is an interdisciplinary workshop, I just want to present myself and my background. So I'm a physicist, basically. I started with experiments, then I switched to theory. Now I'm working in modeling of quantum information experiments, basically, and quantum optics, quantum thermodynamics, and on Sundays, I also do philosophy and quantum foundations with Philippe Grangier and Naila Farouki. So this is a joint work. Right. So now, yeah, I wanted to position a bit as a start of this talk with respect to what I've seen yesterday. So in yesterday's talks, we talked a lot about subjective and objective probabilities and their mathematical properties. And actually, I want to take a step aside and not consider real probabilities here, but the soil on which probabilities grow, which is randomness. So I'm going to talk about randomness and its causes today. And there will be absolutely no mathematical formalism, no equations whatsoever. And to also position with respect to yesterday, I'm going to focus on physical theories. I won't talk about gamblers, for instance. It's physical theories that are built on randomness, so mostly quantum physics, obviously, because of my background. But I will also put this in perspective with respect to stochastic thermodynamics and statistical physics. So, yeah, these are a few pictures from Sandy Zabel's talk that I loved a lot. And actually, he asked a question, are quantum mechanical probabilities subjective? And the answer, if I can make this work, and it doesn't work, so I'm going to stay here, actually, it's no. So that will be also the bottom line of the talk. Okay, so before I talk about quantum randomness, I want to come back a bit on classical randomness. So randomness, very brute force definition, it's unpredictability. And usually in the classical world, the cause of this behavior is a loss of information on the state of a physical system. So you find examples of this in the ensembles in statistical physics or in chaotic systems. You do have a microstate, and either you perform coarse graining or a dynamical evolution, but in the end of the day, this acts as a randomizing box, and in the end, you don't really know anymore in which state the system is, right? And, but there is a hidden state. There is a hidden state that you don't know. So randomness here is really epistemic. It's due to some ignorance, all right? How about quantum randomness? So in the very early times of quantum mechanics, a very naive interpretation was provided by Heisenberg microscope, okay? You want to know the microstate of a given particle, position and momentum, but you need to measure it, so you interact with it, and you perturb. So randomness here is due to the interaction of a microscopic object with a macroscopic experimental context. And actually in this view, the system has a hidden state. The state is perturbed by the measurement, so it's really tasting like an irreducible coarse graining, right? So in this naive approach, quantum randomness looks really very classical and very frustrating, by the way. But I will come back to this point later. So in this talk, I want to position randomness, taking into account that now we have 100 years of experiments and violations of Bell's inequalities, etc. So we know a bit more. And there are two fundamental quantum features that emerge. First of all, contextuality, the fact that the phenomena that we observe depend on the state of a context around the system. And this is a special dedication for Jean Ricmont. The context can be experimental or not, so we don't need to measure, but anyway. And this actually defines a philosophical position that I'm going to explain at length, which is contextual objectivity. So, and the second fundamental quantum feature on which I'm going to build the notion of quantum randomness is quantization. Quantum mechanics, experimental signals, they are discrete, right? So what I want to do here First of all, is to try to think about quantum randomness in this contextual world. And this is a bit challenging because, like I said before, in the classical realm, we think about randomness as due to some ignorance on the state of a system. While in the contextual approach, systems have no state. It's system plus context who have states. So we are going to have to replug our brain to think about randomness differently. So that's what I'm going to do. And the second thing is, can we relate randomness to discreteness and quantization? In other words, can we make quantum randomness a consequence of quantization and discreteness? And that's the second question, which basically is the title of the talk, what is quantum in quantum randomness? All right, so here is the outline. In the first part of the talk, I will define this ontology I was telling you about in the beginning, contextual objectivity, and this, we call it usually the CSM approach, like context, system, and modality approach. In the second part, I will define randomness in this contextual world, and then I will compare different theories that are based on randomness and stochasticity in their programs and in their concepts. So, a new ontology for quantum mechanics. I need to put a bit of definitions all along the way. Ontology is what is, the study of what is, by opposition to what we can know, which is usually epistemology. And so what I'm going to tell about, for those who can read French, it's summarized in this manifest for a new quantum realism, which was written by us, Philippe, myself, and Naila, so one philosopher and two physicists. And the motivation here is to be able to introduce the quantum stuff with words and concepts, no math, right? So for those who are used to start quantum mechanics with let a Hilbert space be, that's not the type of language that we are going to enroll here. And the philosophical position that we defend is that we are realists, I'm going to explain this, and we are objectivists, in the sense there is a world, a natural world that exists out there, and we can know it. But if we are not here, the world still exists and everything, okay? So what is the methodology that we have applied? Actually, ontology can never be demonstrated, right? It's a postulate. But postulates, they are most often based on intuitions, right? And the intuitions, they are always based on custom. So the stuff that we are going to do, the strategy that we are going to apply, is to deconstruct our classical intuitions that come from the perceptions that we have all day, all the time, for free, and rebuild a new ontology by induction from quantum phenomena, which by definition are rare, because they are in the lab, so they are discrete and they are very expensive. But that's the kind of strategy that we are going to apply. So, ontology. What are our postulates? Ontology of objects first. Like I said, we are realists. There is a natural world outside us. And in this world, there are systems, right? Physical systems, atoms, molecules, whatever, which are finite entities of the natural world. These guys, these systems, they are objective. They exist even if I don't observe them. They exist even if I'm not there. And then there are contexts. Context is all stuff that is around the system, right? And this is a lot, because systems are of finite size and the external world is big. So these contexts are big. Contexts, they are objective, again, they exist even if unobserved, and they are made of the same stuff as systems. And last bit of information, these systems and contexts, they produce phenomena, which are events in the natural world. Again, phenomena are objective. If there is a click somewhere, I don't need to be here to hear the click will be there. They exist even if unobserved. They are actual and realized, and they are unique, right? There is one external world. You see me approaching to kill the Wigner's friend, but I will kill it later. Okay, so there is a typical partition that we can think about with respect to this splitting. The system can be a physical system that me physicists study in the lab, and the context can be a measuring device, which is basically a question that I ask to the system. And the phenomenon will be the measurement outcome, which is an answer to the question that I have asked, okay? That's a way to see things. But you can think other ways. Again, we don't need the context to be a measuring device. Can be an environment a la Zurek or whatever. Can be natural. All right, so I've defined objects. Now I'm going to define states. So, because the key to understand everything that I will say is the notion of state. What is a state? Let's use an operational approach. A state is an ID card for the system. So one builds a state by asking the system a certain set of questions and filling the ID card. For instance, this table, I'm asking if it's brown. Yes, it's brown. I pick. Is it made of wood? Yes. And is it heavy? Yes. So I fill the ID card, right? So each question is asked within a given context. So I'm recording the answer here. And then the nice thing with the classical phenomenology is that once the set of questions has been asked, I can come back to the initial question and re-ask the question, are you brown? Yes, it's still brown. So I can obtain repeatably the same answers to the same questions. And this repeatability in the answers, okay, it triggers a feeling of certainty, which is a psychological concept. But then I can predict with certainty what will be the result of my question. And now we are in physics. And we can do even better. We can upgrade now the ID card, which is an operational concept, into a state. And here we are in ontology. Actually, I've postulated that my table here is brown, heavy, and made of wood. So I explained the repeatable answers by the permanent cause, which is the existence of a state. This, I can understand with this what is the genealogy of a classical state, the stuff that I'm going to deconstruct right away. In the classical world, the state does not depend on the ordering of the questions. So I can forget about the context. And I can attribute the state to the system alone. Paf. No context anymore. So this is called a non-contextual state. This is typically classical, right? And I insist on that. That's very important. Our natural intuitions that states pertain to a system of states. States are non-contextual. It's really built on intuition that we get in the classical world. And these are very deep roots. This comes for free permanently. So it's very difficult to get rid of this. But this is what I'm inviting you to do now. Because now, okay, so no, I need to kill the Wigner friends first. So let's kill the Wigner friend. My postulate 0 in there is that the context, the big guys I've told you about before, these guys have their own state, which is non-contextual then. It does not depend on any other context that I can put around, nor on the system it may contain. So there cannot be any Wigner friend here. Once I have decided that one guy has a non-contextual state, it's done and done forever, all right? So that's the postulate 0. And now I go to quantum phenomenology. So what is different with quantum phenomenology? I consider, again, a system and a context, and again, I'm playing the game of filling the ID card. The state of the context now that it is defined, it can be changed. And in general, in the quantum realm, the answers depend on the ordering of the question. So first context, first answer. Second context, second question, second answer. And bam, when I come back to the initial question, then I don't necessarily get the same answer. And there is a very typical experiment in quantum optics when you look at systems which are single photons, the context here is a polarizing beam splitter, and the question that I ask means choosing a certain orientation for the neutral axis of the beam splitter. So this is my first question, and the answer that I will get is transmitted, then transmitted, then transmitted all the time, all right? But then I can ask a second question in between, and then I will have transmitted for the first question, transmitted for the second question, but I won't necessarily get transmitted for the third if I come back to the first question, right? So that's it. So what are the different approaches that we can take with respect to this non-classical behavior? The first one is what I would call the naive realist. The state pertains to the system alone, but the context perturbs the state. So that way, I can never reach the state of the system, basically. So I put a smiley like this because I was always very frustrated by this kind of answer, which is typically Heisenberg microscope answer. Second is instrumentalist or operational approach that Czeslaw mentioned before. So there are no states, there are only preparations and measurements, and I don't commit philosophically speaking, which is, perfectly fine. The third philosophical attitude that you can choose, which is the one that I'm going to present now, is the certainty tracking. You can actually, in the quantum realm, obtain repeatedly the same answer to the same question. It's only the fact that you don't change the context, right? So if you don't change the state of the context, you will keep getting the same answer. And my ID card, I can, in the very same way, upgrade it into a state. But the very difference with the classical case is that this state, this repeatable phenomenon, will label not only a system, but a system and a context, okay? And this state, which we are going to call a modality, is contextual, and it's as objective as it can be, right? Because if I send a photon and its beam splitter on the moon, and this photon keeps being transmitted, even if there is nobody to observe this, it will keep being transmitted, right? So the big take-home message here is that contextuality is not equivalent to subjectivity. So that's a very important point. This leads me to the first postulate. There was postulate 0. This is the first postulate. In this CSM approach, a state labels both a system and a context. And a contextual state will be further called a modality. And modalities, they are as objective as classical state. It's just that they are contextual. And this postulate defines contextual objectivity. Within a given context, to move on with definitions, modalities, they are mutually exclusive. For a photon, you will be either transmitted or reflected. There is no other way around. But two modalities that pertain to two different contexts, they are not modality exclusive, right? Okay. I don't check the time, so I absolutely don't know if I'm late or not. It's okay. Because I still have lots of things to say. So the second and last postulate is, so you remember in the beginning of the talk, I told you there is this partition of the world with systems and context. I've made a postulate 0 for the context, which will behave, if you like, in a classical manner. Now I'm going to also restrict the class of system I'm going to consider. I make the choice for my ontology to consider elementary systems. I picked up the terminology of your papers, Czeslaw. Elementary systems, which are characterized here by a fixed, discrete numbers of n exclusive modalities. So this is the postulate of quantization or discreteness of modalities. Coming back to our examples of photons, there are only two possible modalities, transmitted or reflected, whatever the orientation of my beam splitter. It's only what it means. And this defines an elementary system. And with this, we arrive to a critical, and though it's totally textbook, partition of the world. There is a context, which has non-contextual states, that is around an elementary system which has n exclusive modalities, okay? And I suggest now that we pick up this partition and we focus on it. And I'm going to show you that actually this partition and applying the postulates is enough to get what I'm going to call ontological randomness, so a type of randomness which has nothing to do with the epistemic randomness of the classical world. And actually, it's also enough to get the quantum formalism, right? So I will come back to this point, but this completes the non-universality of quantum mechanics. There is another way of being non-universal, which is this way, actually. Okay, but I will come back to this point. Okay, so yeah, I had an example, but actually I think you get the message now that for single photons, the context, well, the system is the photon, the context is a polarizing beam splitter, and the modality is transmitted or reflected. So what is a bit difficult to get used to, and I must admit, since I'm a classical person as well, a photon has no state by itself. Again, it's a photon and a polarizer that have a state which is called a modality. That's where we can get certainties. And a coherent superposition, what do we call a coherent superposition? It's just a modality in another context, right? If you think about a photon that is H plus V, or to be more provocative, a Schrödinger cat state that is dead and alive, it's not dead and alive. It's that we have to find the good context where we will get a certainty. And then the magic is a bit, well, kind of disappears. Okay, this is a bit of philosophical transparent, but I think I'm going to skip because I'm going to this randomness stuff. So now that you get a bit what is contextual objectivity, I want to define randomness in this landscape. And again, the motivation is to relate randomness, contextuality, and quantization with the challenge that randomness in the classical world presupposes that the system have state. So there is a bit of headache to anticipate. And again, the partition that we are going to consider is this one. And so to understand the demonstration that will follow, there is something important to grasp. How do we go from classical state to quantum states, which are modalities? We have seen two situations, basically. In the classical phenomenology, contexts, they are always there to define a state, but they can be forgotten, right? That's what we've seen, such that the system, the state pertains to the system alone. In the quantum phenomenology, context cannot be forgotten. They are always needed to define a state, a modality, which is the repeatable phenomenon that allows to define the state. How do we go from one behavior to the other? The way to go, okay. So universality, contextuality is universal in a sense. States always show up in a given context. So how do we go from one behavior to the other? It's actually by quantizing the modalities, by going to systems which have lots and lots and lots of modalities here, which are big, to systems which have finite amount of modalities. And this brings the quantum behavior. So how do we understand that? Here is the claim, we have contextuality that is universal. We have discreteness of modalities for an elementary system. This implies that we will have hard contextuality, meaning non-commutations of the question, unpredictability of the answer as the context change, which is ontological randomness. Proof. To prove this, actually, I'm going to consider the simplest Gedanken experiment that you can think about. I'm going to consider an elementary system with two possible modalities, and I'm going to state that I'm able to change the context from C1 to C2, right? So let's consider the first situation, context 1. I can obtain two repeatable answers, yes or no, which defines two exclusive modalities, okay? Now I change the context. I get, again, two possible repeatable answers, yes or no, which defines two other modalities. And now the question that I ask is, what if I come back to the first context? Can I predict the answer that I will get with certainty? The answer obviously is no, but the trick is to understand for which reason. If you think naively or naive realistically, you would say, okay, I'm going to perturb the state that the second context had prepared. If you try to change glasses and plug your brain in the CSM approach, what you say is that, if I can predict the answer with certainty when I go back to context one, this would mean that I have 4 modalities, because then I would be I would have 4 repeatable certain answers, which are yes 1, yes 2, yes 1, no 2, etc. And this breaks the quantization postulate. So actually, that's probably the most important point here, to come back to the initial claim. So we do have universal contextuality. We do have a system with discrete modality. We do have the ability to change the context state. And what appears in this situation is that there is a conflict, because there are less certain answers allowed by the quantization postulate than the possible answers that we can imagine that are the answers to all possible questions. And from this conflict, we get the non-commutation of the questions. And we get these unpredictable answers when I change context. And this is what I call ontological randomness. In the sense, this is a manifestation of randomness which does not come from an ignorance of an underlying state, because there is no underlying state. It comes from quantization and contextuality, which are core quantum phenomena. And what I want to draw your attention of here is that we have reached randomness, which is also a core quantum feature. There was no equation at all here. No equation. It's just picking up phenomena that we all agree on in the quantum world, building the good postulate that we need, and boom, we arrive to randomness. So actually, yeah. Okay, so that's the most important slide. Now, something more. I promised there wouldn't be any mathematical formalism, but I still need to relate a bit. So how do we get Born's rule, Hilbert space, etc.? I need to add a slight ingredient in the requirement there. If I'm able to change the context continuously, so far I have not precised how I change my context. If I'm able to change it continuously, then actually what we show in this paper, and I can answer question later, I mean, I have a few backup slides on this, we can show that this randomness becomes quantum randomness, which is defined by, again, Hilbert space, unitary transformations, and Born's rule. All right? So, okay. So now it's time to draw a bit of conclusions. And I want to compare here quantum physics with different branches of thermodynamics which are based on randomness. So what is the motivation of this third part? Classical thermodynamics, I will talk mostly about, and briefly, because I didn't look at the time, I will talk mostly about statistical physics and stochastic thermodynamics, which are both based on probabilities and randomness. And the idea is that these theories, they have inspired concepts, and they have inspired research programs in quantum physics. And the game is to see, actually, if the transposition was fruitful, if it was good to think about, well, to try to treat quantum randomness as classical one. So that's what I'm going to do now. Statistical physics first. So it treats systems which are large amount of particles and degrees of freedom, but in this view, the real state, like I said in the beginning, it's the microstate, which is a guy which is hidden below. We don't really have access because we live in the macroscopic world, so we only see coarse-grained quantities, right? And the program of statistical physics is to let the macroscopic world emerge by coarse-graining the microscopic world. So it's an averaging of probabilities based on epistemic randomness. And this, if you like, is a reductionist program, right? There are just particles that I gather together, I coarse grain, and I get to the picture of the world that I know. In quantum mechanics, there is an equivalent program, and the most famous person working on this is Zurek. Zurek, for him, the assumption is Schrödinger equation, so it starts, contrary to what we do, it starts with math and Hilbert space. Let a Hilbert space be, and it's ruled with unitary equation. And there is the measurement postulate, which is a bit like the terrible guy that we want to hide somewhere. And the goal is to let the classical emerge from the quantum without needing the measurement postulate by decoherence and stuff. What I want to draw your attention on is that our approach is completely, drastically different in the sense we don't let emerge, we go down, right? We start with a context. We start with the classical world, and we look at a system which can initially be very large, like a mammoth, and we progressively reduce the number of modalities accessible to the system up to the point that we reach this elementary system. And if we do that, we have our critical and textbook situation. We do have a context around an elementary system with n modalities. And like I said, this is this situation that brings ontologic quantum randomness because there are less certain answers than possible questions. And something very important here is that we need a context from the very beginning. This guy will never emerge from applying unitary transformations and the like. It's always already there. So it's the very condition of the quantum formalism. In some sense, and this is an answer to your first point, Czeslaw, about universality of quantum mechanics. What we defend with this approach is that the quantum formalism exists basically at the interface between system and context, right? The context is always already there. There is a system inside, and then quantum mechanics emerges from this, at this boundary. So this is a top-down approach. The context is always there. The system will never swallow the context. There is no emergence whatsoever. And it challenges the classical reductionism that we are used to. Actually, that's probably the biggest point to swallow in this approach. There is always an intrinsic dichotomy in reality. Quantum mechanics talks about systems and context together. So there are basically two sources of randomness to draw a synthesis of what I've said. On the left here, we do have the classical epistemic randomness that we are used to. It's due to an information loss because of coarse graining. It's a bottom-up approach, and it describes the move from microscopic to macroscopic. On the right, we do have quantum randomness, ontological randomness, where unpredictability, it's not an ignorance, it's due to contextuality and quantization. It is a top-down approach, and it describes the move from macroscopic to microscopic. So these are really two different views. Last point, stochastic thermodynamics. Because stochastic means randomness. So basically, stochastic thermodynamics, it's entirely built on randomness. Here is the scenery in stochastic thermodynamics, as described in Udo's talk yesterday. We do have systems that are very, very small, okay? And these systems, you try to control them on the one hand, and the controlling entity acts and has to pay work to control the system. And on the other hand, there is a source of perturbation. It can be a thermal bath, for instance, hence the KB dies here. And with this, the system exchanges heat, energy under the form of heat. So presenting things like this, we see that stochastic thermodynamics can be seen as the science of control against noise, right? Noise can be seen as a resource, because from the thermal fluctuation, we can build engine. And noise can also be seen as a lack of control, and this defines the thermodynamic time arrow, okay? So in the pioneering approaches that were presented yesterday, the noise source was thermal, okay? But now, there is an emerging field these days which is called quantum stochastic thermodynamics. And here, initially, the game has been to pick up the usual scenery of stochastic thermodynamics and declare that all these guys is quantum. So you put them in a Hilbert space. And for instance, your system can have coherences. So you can explore if there is some quantum supremacy of quantum heat engines because of coherence. And you can also explore what is the meaning of your irreversibility and what do become fluctuation theorems in the quantum regime. So that's the game that was initiated, like, I would say, 30 years ago now, started. And, okay, when I look at this, you can think that actually there are too many sources of randomness. And the game that we can start to play is saying, okay, we can think about rebuilding thermodynamics by using the dice that have presented you during, like, I don't know how much time now, which is this quantum dice. So, like sorry, I'm losing my word. I think it's the end of the talk. Everything that I've presented before was meant to let you understand that projective measurement can be seen as the ultimate source of randomness, right? It's a source of irreversibility, and it can also be seen as a source of energy. So it can fully replace a thermal bath. So the kind of game that you can play in quantum stochastic thermodynamics is to pick up the original scenery and to replace the thermal bath by a measuring apparatus. So basically to replace the thermal dice by a quantum dice. And what you can do doing so, you can play very nice game. You can investigate irreversibility of purely quantum nature that is due to quantum measurement and erasure of coherences. And you can play also the game of extracting work from quantum fluctuations. And so that's a bit of advertisement for recent work that we've done, where we have actually shown that you can run engines that perform on quantum measurement alone. You don't need any hot source to make your engine run. And this brings me to the conclusion. So the CSM approach, in the CSM approach, quantum randomness is due to contextuality and quantization. It's not an ignorance. So it's ontological and not epistemological. And the classical world in this approach does not emerge from the quantum. The quantum formalism essentially relies on a classical context in contact with the system. The outlooks. So future games are to get CSM out of the lab and to replace the context by an environment explicitly, to remove any kind of intentionality in our ontology. To rethink epistemology, so that's the special dedicates for the philosopher who is not here, but her game now is to rethink epistemology and ontology given contextual objectivity, and that's my game, rebuild quantum thermodynamics and quantum randomness, and I thank you for your attention.